So there is no cut and dry, definition of a trafficker. Traffickers are across the economic spectrum. They're across race. I mean, anything that you can think about, anybody can literally be a trafficker. So what we see more, the data shows that there are more men traffickers than women, but they're actually both.
Hey guys, my name is Nikki Renfro. I'm a recently retired state trooper, and I decided to start a podcast, Safe Nation Podcast. We're covering safety, security, and law enforcement. On today's episode of Safe Nation Podcast, we have LaToya Porter, a former police officer and now Chief Investigator for Sbaiti Co Law Firm. Welcome to Safe Nation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so today's topic, we're going to be going over human trafficking. That's a very important topic that we certainly want to raise awareness about. And can you give me a little bit of your background?
Sure. So I'm from Dallas. I was a Dallas police officer for about 15 years. I was a major of police. I led homicide, special investigations, cold case, community engagement. I also led the deadliest attack on police, the investigation of the deadliest attack on police, July 7th, 2016. I've since transitioned from the public sector to the private sector. I worked in public affairs for about 3 years, and currently I am the chief investigator of human trafficking at Sbaiti Company.
Okay, very good. So with human trafficking, I think we need to really begin with the definition of it. Um, People have in their mind what they think it might be, but can you tell us what human trafficking is?
Sure, and I'll use the definition that we use here at Sbaiti Company. We use the federal definition that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act says that human trafficking is the force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone to perform labor or commercial sex.
That's a mouthful, right?
It is.
That's a mouthful. But who do you often see is um, participating in this criminal activity?
So it depends on what you mean participating, like who are the traffickers or who are the victims and survivors? What are we talking
Let's
about?
start with the traffickers. Yeah. So who
Oh,
most common do we see that's participating in this? Because it's not just the creepy guys that we, envision in our heads. Sometimes these are professionals. These are the individuals that are out in the public office, ones that we wouldn't even ever think about. So give me
yeah.
an idea of who we're dealing with.
Well, it really varies. So there is no cut and dry, definition of a trafficker. Traffickers are across the economic spectrum. They're across race. I mean, anything that you can think about, anybody can literally be a trafficker. So what we see more, the data shows that there are more men traffickers than women, but they're actually both.
Okay. And then on the victim side, which I think I was corrected, I think they are survivors. If they made it through it, they're survivors. I still think of them though as, as innocent victims when they're first brought into it. But on that end, who are most vulnerable for
So
being either lured in or whatever terminology you wanna use there.
okay, and I'll help you. So when I've spoken to lots and lots of victims and or survivors, and it really depends on the person that you talk to, what they prefer to be called, whether they see themselves as a victim or they recognize their victimization, or someone who's come out of the victimization and they are a survivor and they only want to be called a survivor. But the people that are most at risk, either they suffer some economic hardship, they live in poverty, there is a lack of a support system. They've experienced abuse or neglect, they have low self-esteem, and of course, oftentimes the traffickers prey on the babies. They prey on the teens and the young adults.
Okay. So that gives us a good idea. Is it that the victims feel like they're being promised something better to better their situation? Could that be one of the reasons why that they sometimes might go along with it?
Yeah, so the one of the myths about human trafficking, I know that when I was younger, prior to being in law enforcement, I thought human trafficking was like, hey, you're working on the street, somebody kidnaps you, and they force you into commercial sex. And that's really not what happens in most of the cases. Most of the traffickers are either a family member, a friend, or a romantic partner. And a lot of the people that I have talked to specifically, it's been their family members or the romantic partner. And so what happens is that either, like I said, someone is in economic hardship or they have low self-esteem or they've been abused. And this grooming process happens, which is a systematic process of the trafficker building trust and gaining control and then ultimately exploiting the victim. It's a subtle manipulation tailored to that person's vulnerabilities. So let's say that boy meets girl and they listen to them over it could be a short amount of time or it could be a long time, but they listen to them, they listen to um, their life, their story, and then they play into that. And oftentimes they isolate them. They start making them believe that the only person that cares about them. They're the only person that can do for them. And so, in the process of this manipulation, they say, hey, I'm here for you. We're going to be together, but this is the thing I need you to do. I need you to sell your body for sex. I'm going to take the money, I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to save for us, and we're going to build our lives. And that's kind of how the trafficking happens in a lot of these cases.
So is it mainly about sex?
So there are two kinds. I specifically deal with commercial sex trafficking, but there's labor and there's sex trafficking.
Okay, so tell me about labor. Give me an example of what labor would look like.
So labor trafficking, so there was a case, I believe it was in the paper last week, where this owner of this business, a restaurant, he um, brought some immigrants here from Brazil. He had them work at his restaurant. He did not pay them minimum wage. He made them work long hours and he forced them to live in horrible conditions. This is labor trafficking, which is labor trafficking and commercial sex are both forms of modern day slavery.
Goodness. So what happens when, let's say, if there's a rescue that's made, and then what happens to the criminal?
Well, it depends. So if there's a rescue made and they find the trafficker, then that trafficker is arrested. Now, it really varies on whether or not they face state charges or they face federal charges. As you know, like I know, all of the state's laws are totally different, but they're kind of similar in that more than likely a person who is convicted of trafficking on a state level could get like 25 to 99 years. Now that varies if they get federal charges. It changes the dynamics.
So we know about the individuals who are directly involved and responsible that they may face criminal charges. Um, but on the civil side, which that's now what more you're mainly dealing now with
Mhm.
civil in your current role, whereas previously you dealt with more of the criminal role. But in on the civil side, who else is liable? Who else could be
So,
possibly liable in a case like this? Because in my mind, I'm thinking there may be some assistance there
mhm.
from someone, whether it's the hotel that's housing. Let's say if you have multiple people being trafficked, and this is where they're now residing, and so in that scenario, you would have, let's say, the hotel owner. Would that person be liable, possibly?
So yeah, under the TVRPA, which is the the federal statute to deal with human trafficking. They've made it possible to go after the entities that have benefited from the exploitation and trafficking of individuals. So, yeah, here at Sbaiti, we specifically deal with civil issues and we go after the hotels or the strip club or the apps or the social media that made it possible for this person to be trafficked that should have known or were aware and didn't do anything about it.
Okay. So we're going after the big bucks, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. On behalf of the victim,
Hmm.
and I guess if we're talking about underage folks, then we're talking about on behalf of the victim's family as well, I would imagine. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So how would we know?
Oftentimes,
I'm sorry, go
no,
ahead.
no, you were saying on behalf of the victims if they're underage.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, and in most of the cases, the young adults don't come forward as minors. They often don't talk about it or can't talk about it until they are of age. So a lot of the people, the clients that we deal with are adults.
How would we know if they're being trafficked? Like, what are some of the red flags? What are some of the signs?
Okay, so it really depends on the situation. Let's talk about parents and their children first, and then we'll look at adults. So, as far as a parent and a child, the parent really needs to be a great support system for their child and really pay attention to what they're doing. A lot of the traffickers are using social media. So if the child all of a sudden becomes secretive, or if they are communicating or saying they're going out with somebody and they don't want to talk about who that is, and knowing who they're communicating with on social media, those are kind of signs for parents to look out for. In situations with adults, specifically, like I said, a lot of it is either family or with a romantic partner. So if a person is dating someone and that person offers something that doesn't seem right, like, hey, you should have sex with this person for money, and we're gonna save that money, like this is a clue. It's an absolute clue. If someone has a friend who all of a sudden stops talking to them, or they're secretive about the people that they're hanging out with, these are clues. Now, in the instance of, let's say that you're at an airport or at a bus stop or at a hotel, if you see an age inappropriate relationship where the younger person is not making eye contact, they have poor hygiene, they have on inappropriate clothing, this could be a sign of trafficking. And what a person can do in a situation like that is call 911. They can also call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and they'll give them some information on how to go forward. But those are signs.
Okay. In the example you just gave about the airport, you know how sometimes we just don't want to get in people's business, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you see all kinds of people at the airport, you know, uh, just looking however they look because they're about to travel or whatever. So we don't know if they just normally look like that or if there's a real issue. Would you say that to one of the barriers to reporting and so forth may be that people don't want to get involved? They just want to mind their own business.
I think that's one of the barriers. And another one is just awareness. People don't necessarily know the signs to look for. And so there have been some reports at airports, and they've been totally wrong. So I think they didn't look at the signs. But yeah, a lot of it is people don't want to get involved. And a lot of it is people just don't know what to look for.
Should you approach the person at the
Absolutely
airport?
not.
Not
No, no,
that's
don't
not a
do
good
that.
idea.
No. So if you
Okay.
see somebody, like I said, at an airport or a bus station or even at a hotel, you can call 911, or like an airport or a bus station. More than likely, they have a police officer there. Airport is TSA. At a bus station, there's going to be a security guard there. You can talk to them Tell them that you think this is suspicious, but you don't know. This is what you're seeing. You've been made aware of what human trafficking looks like, and it looks like it to you. So you just want to make sure that everything's okay. But no, I would never advise anybody to approach someone that they think is in a human trafficking situation.
Okay, when you were talking about the parent child situation to where the child may be a victim and the parent has noticed some of these behaviors, them being withdrawn and so forth, could it be a situation where the child is being blackmailed by the trafficker?
Well, it's possible. It could be a number of things, but if that's the case, like I said, if a child starts acting out of the ordinary and being secretive and not wanting to say where they're going or who they're hanging out with, it may be a time to try to talk to maybe a school counselor or some other kind of counselor just to get the information out of them and really see what's going on with that child. There is a trend. It's not necessarily new, but it's more um, out now. That so a lot of kids are actually going to school like they're supposed to. When they leave school, they go into a trafficking situation where they go out and they're being sold for commercial sex, and then they go home at the end of the day like it was a regular day. And so part of my advice, like I said, is just really being aware of what your child is doing, who they're talking to, and they are where they say they're supposed to be. So
What could that potentially do for that child in the long run? What are what harms or how harmful is that for them in the future?
to be trafficked,
Mhm.
is that what you're asking? Oh, the psychological effects alone are horrendous. I mean, when personally from the people that I've talked to at different ages, I'm talking about from, I don't know, 23 to 63, the psychological effects of being trafficked, they don't necessarily ever get over, but they learn how to deal with it. And oftentimes they don't even want to think about it or remember that it was a part of their lives. So that's the psychological side of it. The other side of it is what it does to the body to have that many sexual partners and be in that many sexual relationships. There can be chemical imbalances for women. There can be sterilization. There are a lot of different effects to being trafficked.
Okay. Sterilization. Can you speak on that just a little bit?
Yeah, so from having so many sexual partners, sometimes it damages the inside of the female body and they're unable to have children later on in life.
I see. Wow. Okay. So how does a person get help, whether you need to get help for your child who's been involved or either for adults? How can they get the help that they need?
So, in almost every major city in the United States, there are NGOs, non-government organizations that work with human trafficking victims and survivors. I'm in Dallas. The one here that primarily works with human trafficking victims and survivors is New Friends, New Life. That's a great organization. There's also an amazing organization in DC called Courtney's House, which is ran, the executive director is actually a survivor and a great resource. Her name is Tina Front. But there are so many organizations throughout the country that really work to provide the resources that a human trafficking victim and or survivor needs to move forward.
How can it just be avoided altogether?
So that is an interesting question. And I say this all the time, like I'd really like to talk myself and work myself out of a job because human trafficking, modern slavery should not be, but it is. If you were in law enforcement and I was in law enforcement, there are 20,000 police or law enforcement agencies in the US, right? And all of them have different policies, they have different processes, and I'm pretty sure that all of the actual laws about how they define human trafficking are different. So, one of the ways to work on combating human trafficking is getting everybody on the same page about what it actually is. In a lot of the smaller agencies, they think that prostitution is actually prostitution. What we've learned is that probably about 98% of prostitution is actually human trafficking. So being able to separate and identify those victims and survivors and getting them the resources they need, having awareness from a school level. So maybe seventh, eighth, ninth grade about what trafficking looks like and who could be a possible trafficker to let kids know that, bring awareness to the children as well as adults. So there are a lot of different ways that we can help bring awareness. There are social media campaigns like End Human Trafficking and Human Trafficking Awareness Month, which was last month. It was January. So it's a number of things that we can do to bring awareness and get communities and people involved to help end human trafficking.
Based on your experience, are there any cases that stick out for you? Any really noteworthy ones that raised your eyebrows or it tugged at your heartstrings in such a way that it is stuck with you? Or maybe it even fuels you to keep going in this space?
Yes. So there was when I was over homicide, there was a young lady, her name was Tamika, and we found Tamika in a trash bag in a landfill here in Dallas. And so when the detective did the investigation, he found that her parents were deceased when she was a child. She was placed in foster care. She aged out of foster care and fell into the hands of a trafficker. We were unable to solve that case. And so when I got this opportunity to come and lead the human trafficking division here at Sbaiti and Company, it was rewarding because I'm hoping that we can bring awareness and help get these survivors some form of justice and the resources that they need to move forward on their lives.
In that case, was she reported missing?
Oh, I'm trying to think, and I don't believe she was reported missing because she had aged out of the system and she didn't really have a support system. She didn't have any family, and we found out who she was, I believe, through DNA, but then we found a friend who was also being trafficked, which is how we knew that she was being trafficked. So,
So no
no.
one knew that no one reported that she
Mm-mm,
was missing.
mm-mm.
No one thought enough
And
to say, hey, where is she?
no. And
My
so
goodness.
oftentimes with the traffickers, they select their victims based on the fact, like we talked about, that they don't have a support system. If there's somebody that nobody's going to look for, then they can exploit that person without any repercussions. So yeah, no.
So it's easy prey for them because
Hmm.
it'll better their chances of not being caught, I would imagine. And so
Yeah.
I'm still stuck on this, the missing person or the missing child and the tie-in with human trafficking. Could there potentially be thousands and thousands of individuals who are missing that are caught up in this human trafficking system?
There absolutely could be. So the Hope of Justice reported that in the United States, there's approximately 1 million people in modern slavery, and that includes sex trafficking and labor trafficking. The majority of those people are believed to be in the commercial sex industry. So absolutely, the Department of Justice, I mean, the Department of Homeland Security in 2023, I think they filed like 1,200 cases and the Department of Justice prosecuted about 200 of those cases. So we know that there is a large number of people being trafficked, and the more awareness that we can bring to it, hopefully we can reduce that number. They often go underreported, and if you talk to a lot of the trafficking survivors, they didn't even know what human trafficking was, like the words human trafficking. They know that they're in a situation they don't want to be in. Oftentimes they think they're just prostituting. They don't see it as them being exploited or manipulated.
So I always think about how with technology and so forth, how we have this elaborate camera system, um, in a lot of the areas now all over the country, we're using cameras. I hate to say the name of the company, but it's the flock camera system, um, that's, using the license plate readers, and technology has become so sophisticated. It's just difficult for me to understand why it's so hard to find people who are missing and caught up into this trafficking ecosystem. I would just think by now we could use more technology to find individuals. Um,
Uh,
do you
so
have any
there are
thoughts on where existing technology or where technology is going with that?
So there are some ways to identify victims through technology. A lot of agencies use social media. As far as cameras go, I think eventually we will get to a system where all of the cameras are connected and facial recognition will recognize, hey, this is the person that's missing. There is such and such location. There is some, um, what do you call it? They're working on the technology. I think it's there, but it's not out to the public yet to be able to do that. And then to transition everybody's cameras to that. So when we look at a lot of these hotels specifically, a lot of them have cameras, but they're outdated cameras. So to get everybody on one accord with changing out their systems so that the government and law enforcement has access to those systems to do facial recognition, I think it's going to happen. We're just not there yet. And like I said, a lot of the traffickers connect with their victims through social media. So we can use social media to find some of the missing people. But as far as facial recognition and locations and things like that, we're getting there. We're just not there globally or nationally yet.
When victims are found, do they want to be rescued?
That is a really hard question. Oftentimes, yes. But what happens is that the victims are psychologically manipulated. They're brainwashed. And so if a person is brainwashed into believing that this is the one person in the world that cares for them, this is the person that's been taking care of them, this is the only thing they've known for however long. We could say a year, we could say 5 years or 10 years, but this is their person, this is their world. So to go in and strip a person from their world, sometimes they are happy and open to it, and sometimes they're not. Because once a person is in that system of trafficking, that a lot of times that's all they know, or that's all they become to know, especially when a person was trafficked from the time they were a child or a young adult. So then how do you transition that person into a regular life, a regular job, a 9 to 5? It's very hard. It's very, very difficult. So yes, sometimes they want to be rescued and sometimes they don't, but that's all based on psychological manipulation. And so it's imperative that we figure out how to continue to work with those victims and survivors to get them out of those situations and make sure that they never get in them in the first place.
That brainwashing you're talking about reminds me so much of Stockholm syndrome, where they just really identify with, in this case, I'm calling them the criminal, and they begin to identify. Now, could that be a barrier to prosecuting these individuals? Is when you have a victim, that's their whole world, just like you described, and maybe they won't testify against them.
It could be, and it absolutely is synonymous to syndrome. But the issue that I've seen in prosecution, as far as them testifying, is that these victims, these survivors, are terrified when they try to get out of these human trafficking situations. The abusers excessively physically abuse them, almost to the point of killing them in a lot of situations. So once they're out of it, they don't want to deal with that again. They don't want to deal with the possibility of seeing that person or that person finding them or that person being able to hurt them like that again. So that's really the issue with prosecution.
Do you have any more resources, anything else that you might be able to offer the listeners to either get more information about this or to report to officials about it?
Sure. So the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which, like I said, a lot of the data is only current as of 2023, but they had about 30,000 signals. That means that somebody reached out to them 30,000 times to say, hey, we think this is human trafficking. Out of that, they had about 7,000 victims. So the National Human Trafficking Hotline is a great resource if someone is a community advocate and or a business owner and they really want to help. If you look behind me, this poster right here is put out by the Department of Homeland Security. The Blue Campaign is free. It says when you can't walk away, you can post that up in your business or your community center, gym, or whatever. And it's great. It's a great awareness tool. There's also Polaris. And like I said, there are a plethora of agencies throughout the US, especially in those major cities that people can connect with if they want to get involved in their communities. They can reach out to me. I'm sure I have a connect close to where they are, and we can talk about how they can work on this anti-trafficking awareness if that's something that they're interested in.
So how can they reach you?
So they can reach me at 214 3415
So your phone
or
might
on
blow up.
LinkedIn. I'm
So
on LinkedIn under LaToya K Porter. I'm very accessible. I typically check my LinkedIn quite a bit. So you can reach out to me and message me there, or you can give me a call. I try to respond to calls within 24 hours of messages. So yeah, if you're interested and you want to find out how you can get involved, please contact me and we'll figure it out together.
I will also say about you what I saw that you post on LinkedIn sometimes is the blogs that you do and the information and the wealth of knowledge that you have to share. I think people really need to go on there and check it out if they want more information. It makes it crystal clear. I love how you break things down. It was one of the things that that attracted me to wanting to bring you on as a guest. I thought, wow, she has a real grasp about this topic. And so if people really want to learn more, yeah, I would certainly suggest that they go to your LinkedIn page. Do you have anything else you'd like to add for our listeners?
Know that I just really want to help bring awareness to this. It's really a crisis here in America. Oftentimes, people don't think that it's happening in their neighborhood. I can almost guarantee you it's happening in almost every neighborhood here in the United States. So, even like I said, something as simple as putting this poster up or going to a community meeting and getting your local advocate to come in and talk about what human trafficking is, working with the school systems in your area to make sure that children are aware and like reaching out to me, so we can find out how you can also be a resource for awareness as well as working with survivors to stop this crisis of human trafficking.
Well, thank you so much again, LaToya Porter. It's been my pleasure having you as a guest on the show. And I know people will be even more informed after listening to this. So, all the best to you and the work that you're continuing to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.